We all know humans always make mistakes, and you can't live life without making mistakes. So in this video, we're once again gonna look at the biggest mistakes made throughout history. In the year 2010, a 19-year-old girl named Rachel Kennedy would play the EuroMillions lottery every week. And the thing about her was that she would only buy one ticket, and she would use a specific set of numbers every single week. So every single week, the numbers were the same, because she believed that these are the winning numbers one way or another. Rachel wasn't a very organized woman either, so she would buy the ticket and throw it somewhere in her room. And after weeks of buying these tickets, it piled on top of each other, and you didn't know which is which. On one of these weeks, she buys the same exact number she buys every week and puts the ticket somewhere. But all of a sudden, when the numbers are announced, the numbers she has been choosing for months is the winner. But the biggest problem is she cannot find the ticket. And the winner wasn't $1,000 or a couple $1,000. This was $180 million. After winning this, you're supposed to take it to the EuroMillions office to get your money. But unfortunately, she cannot find a ticket wherever she looks. After looking for weeks, she was still not able to find it, and this only helped the EuroMillions company because nobody had this ticket in their hand, so nobody won that week, and the winning cash adds on to the next week's winning, and it keeps going up. And Rachel Kennedy probably made the biggest mistakes in the lottery world. For the next mistake, let's go to Guam. As you know, Guam is a US territory, and one of the most important air bases of the US outside of the country is in Guam. It's so important that they even have B-2 stealth bombers parked over there. In the year 2008, two pilots were practicing with the B-2 stealth bomber, specifically taking off and landing. But one time they tried to take off, and while they're taking off, the engines shut off. And since they're very close to the ground, they cannot set it back down because they had already went over the runway. The only option left for them was to eject and let the airplane drop on the ground. And that's exactly how it went. They both ejected successfully, but the B-2 stealth bomber smashed into the ground and exploded and caught on fire. The B-2 stealth bomber was a $1.5 billion airplane that exploded in front of everybody. And after investigating, they realized that it was actually one of the sensors that shut off the engine, and it wasn't a pilot's error. At this time, there was 21 B-2 stealth bombers, and one of them had been destroyed, so now there's only 20 left. It's interesting to note that this was the most expensive airplane accident in the world. There has been a lot of accidents where people have died, but this accident is only including the aircraft cost. For our next mistake, let's go to Pennsylvania, specifically in a nuclear power plant called the 3 Mile Island. In the year 1979, they had just replaced the cooling system of this nuclear power plant. And after fixing everything and getting it ready, they decided to turn on the plant. But to their surprise, everything started to go wrong, including the reactor itself, where it started overheating. After it overheats, it starts to have a meltdown, and when this begins, everybody in the facility books it out of there. Thankfully, there wasn't a huge population around it, so everybody got out of there because they thought it was going to explode. Well, it didn't end up exploding, but it did go through a meltdown, so it needed a whole lot of cleaning up. The cleanup cost came out to about $3 billion, and worst of all, the cancer rate in the area went up by 64% because in about 6 years until the year 1985, more than 2,000 people had died of cancer. After inspecting the situation to see what had happened, they realized that the new cooling system that was installed was actually defective and it caused this nuclear meltdown to happen. After this, there was a rule set in stone where every single new component is changed into a nuclear power plant. It has to be tested thoroughly before it actually is used, because you cannot trust a brand new product just because it's brand new. It's kind of like an airliner ordering a 747 or any other aircraft and it comes off the assembly line and it gets handed to the airliner. This will never happen. Whenever a brand new airplane is built in a factory, they test it for about 1,500 to 2,000 hours before it's handed to the airliner. Basically, when you order a brand new airplane, you never receive a brand new airplane. And that's a good thing because they're not going to allow you to use a brand new aircraft with a whole lot of passengers in it. Another place where this is interesting to know is that in a Bugatti Chiron, where it has an extremely expensive 16-cylinder engine, every single car is driven 500 kilometers before it's handed over to the customer, because they don't trust the customer is gonna break it in properly and maybe break this extremely expensive engine. So you never get a brand new Bugatti. Alright, let's go to Madrid, Spain. One of the most famous companies in Spain is the Terra company. And in about the year 2000, they had a whole lot of money and they were looking for investments. In the year 2000, the dot-com bubble had already blew up a lot, and it was at its biggest point. .com is basically websites like Google or Amazon.com. At that time, the number 3 search engine in the world was Lycos.com, which is why Terra decided to purchase them for a hefty price of $16 billion. But a few months after purchasing this, Terra suffered a huge loss because the .com bubble had already exploded and all these .com websites began to decline heavily. It declined so bad that by the year 2004, a private South Korean company ended up purchasing Lycos.com off of Terra for only $95 billion. Let's get back to the United States for the next mistake. In the year 1998, when Chrysler decided to buy Daimler Mercedes for $37 billion, this mistake was done by both of them. Both Chrysler made a mistake and Mercedes Daimler, because before 1998, Mercedes had a very good reputation in terms of quality, and it was known as the best luxury brand in the world. But after this, everything went south. 9 years later, in the year 2007, Chrysler was going damn near bankruptcy, and they were forced to sell Mercedes Daimler, and they sold it to a private company for only $7 billion. So in 9 years, they lost $30 billion. And Mercedes-Benz, on the other hand, known as the best luxury car in the world, suffered a huge loss, and other luxury brands came close to it, and very soon BMW actually passed it in sale numbers. It was basically thanks to Chrysler ruining the Mercedes brand for BMW to take over Mercedes, because they have been trying for decades, and finally they did it. And to this day, BMW is still the #1 sold luxury car in the world. Alright, let's go to Japan. But not modern day Japan, 1945, right before World War II had ended. Specifically, before the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombs. This man named Kantaro Suzuki was the Prime Minister of Japan at this time, and he was taking questions from other news reporters. One of the reporters asked the Prime Minister, "What do you think about the war? Are you guys going to surrender, or are you going to continue fighting?" Mr. Suzuki replies to this question and he says mokusatsu. But what does this mean? You have to note that the Japanese language is extremely different to other languages like English, Spanish, and even Russian or Farsi. At this time, when a Japanese person says something like what Mr. Suzuki said, it could mean many different things, but the way it was translated into English was just ignore. But what Suzuki actually meant is that I don't have an answer and I have to think about it. But all the reporters reported that Mr. Suzuki said ignore to this, and the same message reaches Harry Truman, President of the United States right now, the man that will call for the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The interesting part is that before Suzuki said this, Harry Truman warned the Japanese government to end this war and surrender, because bad things will come soon. And when he returns with an answer of ignore, that really pisses off the American government. And this is when the order of the Hiroshima bombing is happening. A lot of people say the difference between the Japanese language and the mistake the translator made translating this into English caused Hiroshima and Nagasaki to be bombed. By saying ignore, it basically proved to the American government that the Japanese will never surrender. Even though Suzuki said this, but it's not like the Japanese were going to surrender very easily. The Japanese government and the people are very patriotic, and it's going to take a lot for them to accept defeat. The insane part is that they didn't even surrender after the Hiroshima bombing. It took them 1 week after the Nagasaki bombing to surrender. The thing was, after the Nagasaki bomb, Harry Truman ordered for the third bomb to be made, so they're ready for the third bomb as well, because they truly believe that the Japanese will never surrender until everything is destroyed. But 7 days after Nagasaki, they surrendered and signed the papers with the Americans on USS Missouri. They basically handed over their country and their military to the American government, because Japan is not allowed to have an army anymore. They have to work and operate under the American authority. Since we're talking about wars, let's go back a little bit and reach the year 1919, when the British and the French are creating the Treaty of Versailles after defeating Germany in World War I. We all know that in this treaty, they basically put 100% of the blame and the cost of the entire war on the Germans, and this paralyzed the entire country, and most importantly, the economy, where the German mark was literally valueless, where children are playing with it like it's Legos. An economy like this and a situation like this where everybody's starving for food made the German people hate their neighboring countries. And when someone like Adolf Hitler comes along, where he's charismatic and he burns a flame in the hearts of the German people, this is when the hate for their neighbors grew, and they became much more radical and hateful towards everyone that's not in German. And that's why in only 14 years, the Nazi regime took over the entire country. And of course, you guys know the rest of this story. I don't have to explain it anymore. What we're saying is that the biggest mistake was made by the French and the British in the year 1919 by signing the Treaty of Versailles, where they put so much pressure onto a country that they just explode. The British also shot themselves in the foot, because after World War II, this wasn't Great Britain anymore. They gave all their gold to the Americans for them to send weapons and help. And all that gold is in Fort Knox now. And that's when the USSR and the United States became the world superpower, where beforehand the British Empire was the #1 superpower.